name's Kate Price. I'm from King's College London, also Honorary Secretary of UKSG. And welcome to Plenary Session 2. Hope you had a really good lunch and some useful breakout sessions. So just a very brief introduction. The pros and cons of open scholarship have been debated at UKSG conferences for at least the last 15 years. And the trailblazers of open access books, journals and repositories have been practicing what they preach for much, much longer than that. However, with the publication of the Finch report on expanding open access to published research findings in 2012, and the Higher Education Funding Council for England's very recently announced policy for open access in post-2014 Research Excellence Framework, matters have moved on very dramatically in recent times. Now that research funding is becoming contingent on the outputs being made open access, it's obviously become a topic of core concern for higher education administrators and researchers across all disciplines, as well as publishers, librarians and intermediaries. For this plenary session, we're very pleased to welcome two distinguished speakers who can offer different perspectives on the relationship between open access and research assessment. So firstly, I'd like to welcome to the podium Dr. John Rogers, Director of Research and Enterprise at the University of Stirling, who will be speaking on the topic of open access and research management. And we're particularly grateful to John for taking time out of his family holiday to be with us today. Thank you, John.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. It's fantastic to be here, despite the fact that I am on holiday, because as I was looking quickly through the delegate list after I arrived today, I realized that I recognize only 2 or 3 names from the entire delegate group that are gathered here today. And that's very interesting because normally when I speak to people that have heard me say the same things, and I've heard them say the same things many times over. And that can become a little bit sterile for all of us. So what I'm hoping today to do is to really just suggest some ideas and topics and issues that hopefully we can have a bit of debate and discussion around after Stephen has spoken. I absolutely do recognize the benefits of free and open access, and I was enjoying that free and open access when I was up on the Yorkshire Moors yesterday afternoon with the kids and the dog. They're down at a park with my wife at the moment waiting for me to finish, so I'll be especially brief. But I think it's important to start by saying, from a research manager's perspective, that we welcome very much the whole move towards open scholarship. This is a quote from the introduction to my own university's open access policy. At Stirling, we're very proud of the fact that we have always been at the forefront of open scholarship developments, despite being a modestly sized university. Not only, as it says here, were we one of the first to have an institutional repository in place, but we were one of the first to back that up with a mandatory requirement to deposit in the open access repository, the institutional repository. That was a mandate, a mandatory requirement that was observed typically by about 20 to 30% of our academic staff until 2 years ago. And I'll come back to some of the drivers round about the growth of the use of infrastructure later. I was asked to speak today on behalf of the Association of Research Managers and Administrators. I used to be a board member of ARMA and was very happy to take up that invitation on their behalf. And I thought it would be interesting to look professionally at what research managers are saying. And this is an excerpt from a joint statement by ARMA, by ORAL, who are the Association of University Research and Industrial Liaison Officers, and by Praxis Unico, the organisation that represents university spin-outs companies. And there's a joint statement published about a year ago, which I think is very interesting in terms of encapsulating where we as research managers are in our thinking about open scholarship. It's interesting to note that 10 years ago, such a statement would have been inconceivable, not because of anything that's happened in open scholarship, but because of the way in which there has been convergence between those of us professionally who are responsible for supporting and managing research in universities, and those who are responsible for its dissemination, translation, particularly into economic and social benefits. And because of that professional convergence, we've seen those that support the generation of research knowledge and those that support the translation of that into economic, social and cultural benefits merge together. That's a very welcome professional development from my point of view, and it's driven by some of the policy aspirations round about ensuring greater impact from publicly funded research in the UK and I have to say internationally. So it's interesting that this professional convergence that we're seeing in this area has produced a joint statement, and a joint statement that you can look it up on the web very easily, talks about a number of the issues that are encapsulated in this opening statement. I think this statement is interesting for what it says and also for what it doesn't say. It says very clearly, professionally, we are committed to open scholarship. We recognise absolutely that publicly funded research is a public good and should be used for public benefit in a whole range of different ways. It goes on to say that we don't see any impediment that's created by that principle of open access to the commercialisation of research. That's been a big debating point in our spheres, whether if you actually put stuff out there, it prevents effective commercialisation and translation into economic outcomes. And this statement goes on to say that it's not. Those two things are not mutually exclusive at all. And it goes on, I think, also to talk about a number of issues where we can see tentative forward movement, because there is a lot about this statement which still reflects the early stage of thinking professionally within research management circles around open scholarship. It's interesting that the organisations here support open access as a means of enabling wide access. And that's absolutely true. Open access does enable wide access, but it doesn't guarantee that access will occur. So there's something missing there. It says here that there's an expectation that that open access will lead to the productive use of research results. Well, yes, it should, but it doesn't necessarily just by being out there ensure that it will happen. In both academic and non-academic settings, well, certainly there's very much our experience that putting open access material onto open access platforms from an academic perspective drives up citation counts that people like me obsess about in terms of research performance measures, drives up citation counts, drives up awareness, drives up use and reuse of information. But we don't have anything like that same information when we move beyond the academic sphere and look at non-academic sessions. So there is a belief here that open access is a good thing, but both in this excerpt and throughout the whole of the professional thinking that we see in my areas at the moment, there's a whole series of questions yet to be explored. Yes, it's good that knowledge, research outcomes are readily and freely available, but there's much still to think about, much still to do in order to ensure that that openness translates into the range of benefits that everyone wants to see. And I think it is interesting as well, just to touch in passing, that this statement is not just about open access to outcomes, it's also about open access to research data. Research data management, open access data is probably one of the most challenging technical issues that research managers in universities are facing currently. But it is a fascinatingly exciting time to be involved in research management. And the open agenda is driving a whole range of things which I don't think we had necessarily always anticipated. 10 years ago, I knew what JISC was. I knew what JISC was because I used to work for the Funding Council, and JISC were in the basement, not quite the basement, the bottom floor of North Avon House in Bristol. So I knew there was such a thing, but I really had very low awareness of what JISC did. Now, JISC and research management professionals are very much partners in a whole shared series of endeavours and projects. And I think that cross-professional integration, cross-professional development that goes way beyond the changes in research management that I've already touched on is a very welcome and exciting development, because it brings a whole series of perspectives to bear that haven't necessarily really unlocked their potential thus far. So lots of things happening, perhaps born out of necessity. we have to put our research outputs onto open access platforms. We don't know how to do it, or we didn't know how to do it, so JISC was a natural source of support and guidance for us. But that has spawned a whole range of very interesting cross-professional projects. And then we have some major policy developments. Horizon 2020, with a principle of open access to research outcomes and to research data built into the very heart of the European research area. And that's tremendously exciting because it moves beyond the jurisdiction of the UK into a much broader sphere and shows that a research power which starts to equate to the US in terms of its scope and scale, the European Union together, has this principle of open scholarship at the very heart of public funding across that whole territory. And I think that's a very prominent, very important part of the policy environment that we're working in. But I also think that open scholarship has is triggering some perhaps unexpected developments that are not intuitively anything to do with open access per se. I'm fascinated by the ORCID concept. The fact that the research community increasingly are seeking ways to identify each of their members uniquely in what is a transient, a migratory, a shifting and a fluid community. And until we were actually in an era, in a period of mass access to open scholarship, I don't think ORCID would have had anything like the same resonance. So I think that the perspectives of the academic research community are being opened up massively by the open scholarship agenda. And that, in part, is driving some really interesting and really worthwhile and positive developments like ORCID that we've only just scratched the surface of. And big data, you might think, is furthest away from this whole open scholarship agenda, but I have a suspicion that some of the thinking that's driving the investment by RC UK and others in big data at the moment, and that's driving some of the thinking, in my university's case, of our social scientists and our health scientists, is triggered by that understanding, that view that open access to large amounts of information is a good thing. And there are, of course, lots of important safeguards put around the information that's available through big data approaches, but the principle itself that sharing across large information sets unlocks a whole range of different interesting possibilities, I think is permeating the research psyche and is blending together some of the concepts that we're seeing within open scholarship and within the changes that are occurring in something like big data. So let me just touch on a few of the issues that trouble research managers when we think about open access. Cost. I don't really want to knock HEFCE too much, but I do love the way in which the funding councils are able to make statements like this one, that open access for the REF can be introduced without additional cost, and none of us really are in a position to challenge them, despite the fact that we know it to be untrue. The additional cost of developing open access for universities across the UK is very, very substantial. And that's not to say that I believe from the second quote, the Russell Group's assertion that only 10% of the true cost is being funded. It's also quite easy to knock the Russell Group now that I stand outside of it. But there's no mileage in really attacking either of these extreme positions. The point I want to make is that there is a significant additional resource requirement for universities to engage with the whole open scholarship agenda. Now, that does not mean that that's a bad thing. What it means is that there are a series of investment decisions, there are a series of resource decisions that we need to make as a research sector that allow us to take full advantage of the range of exciting possibilities that open scholarship opens up. And actually, HEFCE and the research councils have got one thing absolutely right, that in the medium term, the efficiencies to be gained for the whole research system, publicly funded research system, from open scholarship will be very, very substantial. And that resource will be released to be reinvested back into research. So one of the reasons why research managers as a profession are so positive about open access is we see the medium and long run benefits, however challenging the short-term adjustments are. So cost, resources, those are an issue, and that's not just about the cost of paying APCs. That's actually a very small part of the overall debate, and in some ways it's the least exciting part of the overall debate. This is about the cost of investing in changing behaviours, supporting professionally, changing behaviours within the academic community. It's about thinking about ways in which we enhance research performance and unlock new ways of conceptualizing and delivering and developing research and its translation from using open scholarship. And the cost of those things is much greater than the cost of APCs will ever be, but the savings, the benefits financially, and therefore the benefits to the research system from doing those things will be very great. Systems are a particular aspect of this, this whole question about resourcing the development of open scholarship. This is just a screenshot. The details are unimportant from my own university's research management system. We have spent in staff and capital cost over the last 3 years approximately £500,000 putting this system in place. And that's, for a medium-sized research university, a good indication of the kind of cost. Some larger universities will have put much more resource into systems development. And we're still going and we're still developing these systems. Now, I talked earlier about how we saw a sudden increase a couple of years ago in sterling in the use of our institutional repository for deposit by our academic staff. And there are a couple of reasons for that. We brought this system on stream, and by inputting, well, like all these systems, it harvests outputs and then it can be corrected by the authors. But by putting in the bibliographic data to the system and then attaching a copy of the article, that then integrates directly with our institutional repository, and so you see compliance happening. But it also outputs to our web. So all of our researchers' individual web pages and our research group web pages are driven now by this system. And so we were able to use the imminence of the 2014 Research Excellence Framework to say to people it would be a good idea to ensure that the records that we're putting out there through our research management system and through our public web are consistent with the information that we're returning to the REF. Of course, REF panel members never ever look at institutional websites. They only concentrate on the material that's presented to them in submissions, and we all believe that absolutely to be true. But it is a good thing nonetheless to ensure that we have consistency across all of our data sets. So there is systems investment going on as a particular part of the challenge and the set of issues around about developing the infrastructure to support open scholarship. What we're thinking about currently on our development roadmap for this system, along with many other universities, is research data management and how we can create efficient ways of supporting our academic researchers to comply with, but go much further than just complying with, to take full advantage of the opportunities that effectively shared research data management offers. And the only way we can do that without enhancing the costs substantially is by thinking about system support, thinking about new efficient system-supported processes for managing everything from research outcomes through research data management and so on. So there's a really big set of questions around about research systems management, which is interesting us. Green or gold? Green or gold, I think, is much more than a question of cost or a question of protecting the interests of one group or another. Whatever we think about the Finch report and the debate that has raged beyond that report, whatever we think about the assertion from HEFCE, from the research councils and from the government that the gold route is ultimately the most sustainable, I think there's a really interesting conceptual debate that's going on beyond this. Because in my experience, many of our academic researchers have an instinctive preference for the green route. And they have an instinctive preference for the green route, not just because they have some dim view of publishers who charge a lot of money for journal subscriptions, allegedly. They have an instinctive appreciation for the green route because they think it is increasingly supporting new ways of scholarly interaction, which they find interesting and which suggest to them many possibilities for different sorts of community-supported publication of academic outputs that haven't really been explored. I wasn't able to be here this morning, but I saw that one of your sessions earlier was touching just on this very question of whether we're about to see a fundamental change in the nature of scholarly publication. And I think that could well be the ultimately the most exciting and interesting outcome of the green versus gold debate. And we have to ask the question, is openness always a good thing? This is a very challenging topic because there is a line of thought that says absolutely openness is right, but we have at Stirling some very sensitive data sets, the famous one being our data set of opinions, interview opinions from 1,015 and 16-year-olds on what encouraged them to take up smoking. And we use that for our pioneering work to prevent the take-up of smoking by teenagers. The big tobacco companies would love to get their hands on that data. Our researchers will never release it. So interesting questions there. I'm not going to say anything about REF and open access. I think it's very interesting to see where we're going with this. I think ultimately we will all come to welcome this development from the funding councils, but Stephen's going to say much more about that in a moment. Thank you.